Good morning, everyone. We are back together again this morning for the conclusion of last week's teaching in 1 Samuel chapter 25. So if you will find your place there, we've been talking about Abigail amidst adversity. So Abigail has been confronted at this point from a servant in their household that David is coming to wreak vengeance on Nabal and his entire household. You'll remember that David and about a band of 400 to 600 men are living in caves from King Saul, and they have encountered Nabal's servants who are caring for 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. They've cared for them, they've provided meals for them, they've provided protection, and David has asked for a meal for his men, and Nabal has refused, even accusing them of possibly being runaway slaves. The servant has come to Abigail because Nabal is not approachable. He is a worthless man, unable to be spoken to. So the very first thing we said in the middle of adversity is that we need to be like Abigail and be approachable. Then the next thing Abigail does straightway is to prepare food for 600 men and load everything up, send her servants ahead, and she does this and meets David as he's coming to wipe out Nabal's family. And so she acts appropriately. Remember that she does not go against any directive that her husband has given her, that it would have been her rightful place as a lady of the household to distribute household goods. And so she does that. And then as she meets David, remember, she gets off her donkey right away. She falls at his feet and she humbles herself. So she is not arrogant. And then she acknowledges authority. She's already acknowledged her husband's authority and not going against anything he has said. But then she acknowledges David as authority. And remember, we said that in her discourse with David, she calls him Lord, little l, 14 times. And then she also acknowledges God's authority over the situation and over David's life. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. And then remember, the very last thing that we saw in verse 24 is that she acknowledged responsibility, that it was her responsibility to provide that meal for those men, and she didn't do it. Now, remember, she says she didn't see the men, she didn't know, but we said it's not enough to say you don't know. You must take responsibility for what is your responsibility in any situation. So she's approachable, she acts appropriately, she was not arrogant, she acknowledges authority, and she accepts responsibility. So we're going to pick up this morning back in verse 24. And I had originally said there were 4 more steps, but I saw a little something more here in verse 24 that I wanted to point out. So we actually will have 5 more steps today. So we've talked about the first 5, and we'll talk about the second 5. So verse 24 has said, she fell at his feet and said, "On me alone, my Lord, be the blame." Okay, so she's accepted responsibility. Here's the second part of that verse. "And please let your maidservant speak to you and listen to the words of your maidservant." So again, this is 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 24. She asks for permission to speak. Sometimes in situations, especially if tempers are flared, it can be important for us to just ask, can I say something? Can I speak to you in such a way that will not further anger you, and that you would see it out of a rightful heart of love and wanting good in this situation? And sometimes that's really helpful for the other person to say, yes, you may speak. And that helps them be ready to listen. And it helps you to speak in such a way that is self-controlled. And so she asks David for permission to speak. If you'll skip down with me to verse 26. Now therefore, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, since the Lord has restrained you from shedding blood and from avenging yourself by your own hand, now then, let your enemies and those who seek evil against you, my Lord, be as Nabal. So the next thing that Abigail does after she asks permission to speak is she affirms God's role in David's life. If you'll recall, when Abigail goes out, just at the right time, David and his men meet her on the backside of that mountain. That was God orchestrating intervention in a situation that was not going to be good for Nabal and his family, or for David in his future. And so Abigail says, God's the one that has kept you from avenging yourself. And she's having David realize this. Sometimes it's really helpful in the middle of adversity for both parties to take a step back and just to see God's hand. Where is He? What is He doing? What would He have you know? And so here she is just acknowledging that the Lord has done the restraining. The Lord is in the middle of it. And what would He have David see? And so she is just acknowledging that and speaking that to David so that he also will be able to acknowledge that. Let's go to verse 27. Now let this gift, remember she has brought a ton of food with her, right, to provide the meal. Now let this gift, which your maidservant has brought to my Lord, be given to the young men who accompany my Lord. Please forgive the transgression of your maidservant. Again, she's still putting out there, it was my fault. It's my transgression. Please forgive this. And she has brought this gift. So she is amending an action that was originally wrong. Nabal did what was wrong by not providing the meal. And Abigail comes along and she amends that. She's trying to help things to go well, to take a wrong and make it right. Now, sometimes in situations, there is no amending an action that's already been taken. However, there can be times where we should have done something we didn't do, and we can now do that thing that we should have done in the first place. And it is good and it is right for us to do that when necessary. Now, I want to make a distinction here between buying affection or buying forgiveness. It is not good for us in the middle of differences to constantly buy something for others to try to make up for that. There needs to be just the forgiving of one another and the loving of one another without gifts being involved. But this was not what Abigail was doing. There was a need for David and his men who were on the run, and she wanted to provide for that need. And remembering what David had already given for her own household and caring for their servants. And so she was doing what was right, amending an action of Nabal's that was wrong. Okay, so at this point, she's asked permission to speak. She's affirmed God's role in restraining David, and she's had him to see that, to consider that. And she is amending a wrong. All right, let's go to the middle of verse 28 here. She says, she's already asked for forgiveness here in the middle of it. And so she says, "For the Lord will certainly make for my Lord an enduring house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil will not be found in all your days. Should anyone rise up to pursue you and seek your life, then the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living with the Lord your God, but the lives of your enemies he will sling out as the hollow of a sling." And so she's having David realize what God's promised, he's going to do. So she's assuring David that the Lord will keep his promise. He will be king. And I love that phrase there. He will be bound in the bundle of the living. In my growing up, we moved houses a lot. And my mom really had it down to a science of how to bundle the house up and move everything without things getting broken. And we didn't always do that with newspaper. My mom would take blankets and sheets and dish towels and washcloths, and she would just carefully bundle dishes and pictures and treasures of our house so that in the move they would not be broken. And so Abigail is doing a wonderful, wonderful thing here and just saying, listen, God is protecting you and bundling you like a treasure. And you might be running from cave to cave right now, but be assured, God is going to sustain you and you will be king. And then she couples this for David. Watch this, verse 30. 1 Samuel 25, verse 30. "And when the Lord does for my Lord, according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and appoints you ruler over Israel, this will not cause grief or a troubled heart to my Lord, both by the shedding of blood without cause, and by my Lord having avenged himself." Now this is packed full of something that we all need to meditate on and consider. The very end of this talking with David, she is having him realize, listen, David, when God does for you what he promised he would do and you come into your kingship, you want to be able to come in with a clear conscience, nothing troubling you, that none of the shedding of the blood for your own cause. Remember, she's pointing out here, this isn't about you doing something that God's told you to do. This is about you being angry and just avenging yourself, which obviously, guys, is never right. Now, I don't know if you've been like me, but I always seem to allow my temper to rule the day and to have me say and do things that I knew, even in the midst of it, was not right, was not good to say, was not good to do. And I've come out of those situations with regret. And Abigail is alerting David, if you do this, there are consequences coming that you're going to regret the rest of your life. And that thing alone, just alerting him to the consequence, puts the brakes on for David. And ladies, let me say, we need to be like that for others and allow others to be like that for us. Alerting us, if you do this, Christy, here's the possibilities. Here's what could happen. Do you really want that? And we need to be willing, stepping out in faith, not putting what we want people to think about us or being afraid that they might not like us anymore or might not be friends with us anymore. We need to put that aside and speak truth. If you do this, this is what's going to happen. I have to wonder if our lives wouldn't be different if people were willing to confront people who are contemplating, in particular, divorce. And as a divorced woman, I think I can speak to this. If people would come alongside and say, if you do this, you might think that life is going to be peaceful after that divorce, or you might think life is going to be like this or like that, but let me tell you what really comes along with divorce. And speaking those consequences, being upfront about what could happen, that's really important for us to do and for us to accept when someone does that for us. So let's review what Abigail's done. She started off by asking for permission here in this portion, asking permission to speak. May I speak? Would you listen to me? And then she affirms that God's hand has hindered David from avenging himself, that they met just at the right time and God has intervened. And now David's going to have to decide what to do. Will he carry it out? Or will he come under God's authority and not do this thing? And then she amends an action and provides that meal that should have been provided for them all along. And then she assures David that God is going to do what he said he would do. We can always rest assured that God will keep his promises, right? God doesn't lie, and he never changes, and he will keep those promises. And then finally she alerts David, listen, if you do this thing, when you come into your kingship, there's going to be regret, there's going to be grief, there's going to be sorrow. Please don't do this thing. And then David relents. And he chooses not to carry out and avenge himself by wiping out Nabal and his family. Go all the way down with me, please, to verse 35. So David received from Abigail's hand what she had brought him, and he said to her, go up to your house in peace. See, I have listened to you and granted your request. And isn't that what we want? In the middle of adversity, what we really want is peace. So, just as a recap, to be an Abigail in amidst of adversity is to be approachable, to act appropriately, to not be arrogant, to acknowledge authority, to accept responsibility, asking permission to speak so that the other party is ready to listen, to affirm God's role in a person's life and in the middle of the situation, to amend a wrong action that has already taken place, to assure people of God's promises of His Word, and then to alert people to any consequence that could come. That's what it means to then, at the end of everything, have the adversity to end in peace. I love you all. I can't wait to see you soon, and happy Mother's Day to everyone.